Released in 2004, Half-Life 2 is the smash hit successor to the already critically acclaimed Half-Life 1 released by Valve 6 years prior. In the game, the player must traverse a wide variety of landscapes on their way to stop the Combine forces that have taken over the Earth. In one section, the player must traverse the bleak and dangerous coastline to break one of their allies out of prison. To help the player accomplish this task, they are given a buggy to drive. This car is equipped with a turbo function, a laser gun that can be fired while driving, and an infinite ammo source. These features work together to provide a feeling of refuge for the player, as they allow the player to run away from enemies as well as dispose of them quickly. The car also provides a sense of prospect. The player is able to clearly see the world in front of them without having to leave the car. Under normal circumstances, the combination of a space containing both prospect and refuge leads to players not progressing nor exploring the environment, as they already have everything that they need. The designers of Half-Life 2 get around this problem by subverting typical ideas about passive progression, limiting access to the car, and providing breadcrumbs for the players to follow and be rewarded by, all of which incentivize a unique on- and off-rails gameplay style that makes this section of the game memorable and exciting to play. To start, the game establishes the player's dependence on the car, as well as the explicit paths in the level, so as to illustrate to the player that the car is necessary for progression. When the player enters the area, a voice continuously calls down at them to get into the car. The player can see a battle taking place below with enemies called antlions that pop out endlessly from the sand. If the player tries to go down without the car, they will be swarmed by antlions and likely killed if they don't take the ladder back up. This forces the player to get into the car. Once in the car, the player is lowered down via a crane, and the car flips over accidentally, and the player is swarmed by antlions. As the player's health decreases, the antlions pile up and the sounds of gunfire continue. This whole scenario increases the sense of urgency, pushing the player to flip over the car quickly and drive away as fast as they can. The player will soon realize that slowing down or stopping will lead to more antlions spawning, reinforcing the idea that this area should be moved through quickly. There is a clear dirt path for the player to follow right next to where the car is dropped that allows the player to regain more trust in the game after it just dropped them into a swarm of enemies, as well as get a refresher over how driving feels. After crossing the gap in the road with a boost, antlions will stop spawning, causing the player to feel at ease and to slow their driving. Immediately after this point, the player is presented with a house marked with a special symbol that is already established to lead to items for the player. Given that the player likely took some damage in the scuffle, they will enter the building to get some health and ammo. This teaches the player that there are times that it is okay to leave the car and that doing so can be rewarding. The unavoidable dead body right in the entrance of the building seeks to reinforce the sense of danger. Even though things are calmer without the antlions, you still aren't safe. The player is then presented with a tunnel to drive through with a clear highway road. Then, the game drops the player on its head for a second time, making the warning signs about the road conditions from earlier suddenly much more pressing. When the player touches the sand, the antlions will spawn, again signaling the need to rely on the abilities of the car to flee. In the immediate line of sight of the player is a house, which the player will remember from moments earlier contains plenty of useful items. Additionally, there is a device that repels antlions already installed, which makes the player feel safe in disembarking from their vehicle to check out the building. The player isn't likely to leave the vehicle behind, as it's the surest way past the antlions to come. The house does indeed contain items, but there is a jump scare as well as an incredibly strong zombie inside. This again pushes the player to keep moving, which will lead them back to their car. In this way, the game presents an on-rails, almost theme park-like series of attractions split between driving segments. The repellent devices from earlier clearly fit with the Combine aesthetic, so the player knows that the Combine are here, which they will become totally aware of 2 stops down the line. When they see the Combine, they will likely already be driving at high speeds, almost leading the player to the conclusion that the car is a great weapon, increasing the car's value. With the Combine disposed of, there are more supplies to pick up. Further down the road, the player encounters a gate, blocking their car and their sense of progression. This forces them to interact with nearby NPCs, incentivizing exploration, as well as slowing down the pace just in case the player has been driving non-stop up until this point. The exciting firefight that follows more directly emphasizes to a more impatient player that stepping out of the car has its benefits than following a breadcrumb trail that contains minimal health and ammo. The player then goes back off-road and is presented with a bridge that not only establishes to the player the restoration of the path forward, but also the need to continue to use the car, especially given how far the bridge is from the player. Again, antlions swarm the car, driving the player forward. Only this time, the player is greeted by hostile gunfire from Combine soldiers. Given that the car cannot drive up to bash the guards and there is no other progression path, the player must abandon their place of refuge and fight once more with their own skills. This divorces the player from the car, but due to the past experiences the player has had, they know they need to get back in the car at some point, creating a feeling of regret and confusion in the midst of battle. The player is then allowed to use a crane like they had done to them earlier to move the car up to the path forward. The Combine then come out, and after a brief firefight, the player is reunited with their car, which they can utilize to take out the remaining enemies and drive off into the distance. The rest of the level takes a similar form. The player's driving gets interrupted by a physical block or a group of enemies, they must separate from the car while also keeping it in sight, and they are treated to an exciting gameplay experience. In this sense, the game makes the player rely on the car to see dangerous situations coming ahead, escape from danger, and deal damage to enemies, while also forcing the player to leave the car at times and step out of their comfort zone and into exciting gameplay experiences. Similar to a river rafting tour, the raft is necessary and the medium through which the adventure is carried out, but there are also plenty of opportunities to disembark from the raft and enjoy something else. This allows the player to feel a sense of control, in addition to a sense of attachment, which is amplified by the dangers presented at the various points of encounter. All of these elements in conjunction create a thrilling gameplay experience that makes the player weigh the dangers of their environment with their desire for excitement and fun, forcing them to deeply immerse themselves in the world, further amplifying the thrill presented. When the player finally does have to say goodbye to the car, there is certainly a sense of melancholy, as well as the idea that the player must refocus themselves on the prison break to come.